Are we ready, Mark? We're broadcasting live over here with Mac and Mark. First of all, thank you for coming out on a night when I know there's another event, which we, of course, didn't know when all this was planned. But when we're complete, when we finish, we're going to have the debate on this big screen. So for those of you who'd like to stay. And it'll be like going to a drive-in movie. To see, it'll be your entire life, you can say, I've never seen a debate like a drive-in movie. So that'll be afterwards. I'm going to introduce Mac in a couple of moments. I want to thank both professors who are very busy to come, and Dr. Tree's coming a long way. I've just met our great professor from Lone Star tonight, and Dr. Trees I've known for 20 years, and every time I see him he says, "Go Astros," even when they're having a season like this year, right? Especially when they're having a season. And he's from, and Mac will introduce them properly, from South Texas College of Law, both distinguished professors and doctors in their field and know the Constitution. And this is really going to be enlightening for everyone tonight. And I want to thank Lone Star Community College for hosting this tonight. So thank you, Doc. Do you want to come out and say, just welcome everyone? Sure. All right. And this is, how many of you are here for the first time? Let me just give you a quick snapshot. Quick snapshot. This is College of the Future, because Lone Star had vision, Dr. Carpenter had vision. They decided to buy these buildings when they were for sale instead of building buildings, which they were able to get this for about 20 cents on the dollar. In fact, you couldn't afford to build this today. This used to be compact, part of HP. They spared no expense when they built it. And the concept was to combine community college, 2 years, with four-year universities. So I'm not sure the way you actually, you did come by. I don't know if you noticed the University of Houston, Sam Houston State, TSU. So students can come here. We also have a charter high school here. So you can be in the 9th grade in the charter high school, come up to the cafeteria, and be sitting with community college students and four-year students. And for a lot of students who go to community colleges, very often students who go to community colleges, no one in their family's ever been to college before, and they really don't think about the possibility of having a four-year degree. They come here and they mix and mingle with the other students, and they don't have to pay room and board because they live close by, and they're able to do their 2 years at Lone Star and then walk down the hall and take the course that they want from U of H or TSU or Sam Houston, and probably more universities coming. This is the way we get to that $10,000 or $11,000, $12,000 college degree. This is how you do it. And to give you a sense of growth, I predicted when we got involved in this project several years ago that within 10 years they'd have 20,000 students here. It will be a massive campus. They already have 5,500 students here. And it's only been open, what, 2 years? 2 years. And this is a great model. It's a beautiful campus. It was very cost efficient for taxpayers and for students. And to give you a sense of this is why there'll be 20,000 or more, within 5 square miles, you have 1 million people. 5 square miles. So, and you know, a lot of students, you know, used to drive across the traffic, across town to U of H. They don't have to do that. They can come right here. So, it's just a wonderful facility, and it is, I think, the model of education in Texas. Let me introduce Mac tonight, and because this is the season, the busiest season of my life, I have another event in Sugar Land that I'm going to this evening. But Mac is going to be your MC. He'll take the questions later from the audience. He'll move the debate along and the program along. And let me just tell you a little bit about Mac Makowitz. And how many of you listen to Mac in the morning? All right. Someone called me not long ago. You joined us in June? July? June. End of May, but yeah, basically June. And we were looking for a host because we had a change in the morning, and someone said, you need to meet Mac. He was a Navy SEAL. He was a sniper, instructor and sniper, hand-to-hand combat, served on Navy SEAL Team 5 and 6, one of our great heroes. You know, you're the best. When you're a SEAL, you're the best of the best of the best. And so it was the weirdest interview, because when I interviewed him, I thought, I'm saying, well, can you do this, and can you do this, and can you go to the breaks? Because he'd never done talk radio before. I'm thinking, wait a minute, this guy can blow up anything I can imagine. He can shoot any weapon in the world. He can drive a speedboat. He's like James Bond. And I'm asking him, do you think you can get out of a commercial break and come back in, and you know? And so, and then he was you know, he's a little intense in the morning. Sometimes a little bit, you know, a little bit intense. So he would say, yes, I can do this. And I go, okay, I got it. So he's been just a delight to work with. He's such a pro. He's been, as many of you know listening, he's been in Los Angeles for the last 6 weeks. He's been doing the show every morning from LA, taping a new show for the History Channel. He had a show on the Discovery Channel. And I don't know if he's going to share some of that with you, but it's a great honor to introduce our morning host, Mac Makowitz, American hero, and he's going to conduct the evening tonight. You're in good hands, and thank you all for being supporters of KSEB, and thank you all for being supporters of the things we've done, our clients, our sponsors, and we really appreciate you. With that, please welcome Mac Makowitz. Mac.
Dan, Patrick, everybody. Dan, thank you for the opportunity. And just to, you go in there and you start correcting your boss a little bit. It's SEAL Team 1 and 2, okay? Just get that off the plate, just before that blows up in my face later. First of all, I just want to start off really cleanly. Thank you all, each and every one of you, for taking the time to be here. I appreciate it tremendously. There's a million other things you could be doing tonight. I don't know, like watching a debate, maybe some football. The fact that you've taken the time to come here to talk about the Constitution, that says something special about you. It really does. And I say that because there is so much at stake. When I talk about the race to November and the 270, there is a lot going on. And the race, the work won't be done then. It will be about making sure that everyone else that we talk about, everyone we talk about as being elected officials, that they adhere to these values, to these fundamental principles. And for me, I got to say, for me, I was blessed that I had the opportunity to go into the military, that I was blessed to make it into SEAL Team and to do that job. But I want to let you know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I was able to do that job because of you. You created those opportunities. And then guess what? Your parents created those opportunities for me. And their parents created the opportunities for me. It was because people paid their taxes and did what they were supposed to that I actually had the opportunity to go and be of service. But I got more out of SEAL Team than anyone, I got more out of my time in the military than you ever paid me to do that job. I would have done that job for free. And basically I almost did, $25,000, $27,000 a year. Okay? All right? So, but with all that said, I took the idea of the oath to protect and preserve the Constitution of America from enemies both foreign and domestic. I'm taking that seriously. And as a guy who was so busy focused on the job itself that I really never thought about what that meant, to be honest. I just didn't. And it wasn't until more than 3/4, maybe halfway through my time in the military, that a buddy of mine turned me onto the Cato Institute. And in doing that, I got the Policy Center briefing, the big book, the yellow book that they send out. And then what happens is they send a Constitution with it, and they send a Declaration with it, the Declaration of Independence with it. And I really sat down with it because I hadn't really sat down with it. I mean, when I was a kid, we did actually talk about it. I was at a Southern Baptist school with a state since juvenile delinquent, so I fit right in there. And they did actually truly believe and love and cherish the country. They referred to the television as the idiot box, and they made it very clear that the television was the evil thing on the planet, and that you needed to spend time looking at the Bible, and you needed to spend time understanding a little bit about this country. And so the Pledge of Allegiance was very important. Singing, your grand old flag was actually really important to them. And so I learned all those things when I was growing up. And I also learned what it was like to get bent over a brick wall and switched, okay? I learned what a steel ruler looks like on your hand and your backside. And I was better off for it, frankly. And so when I say all this, it's something that is just off. There seems to be something that's off. And that is that self-discipline. It is that self-responsibility, that self-reliance. We seem to have lost our way. And when I was trying to do it, and I've challenged you when you've listened. By the way, how many people do listen in the morning? Thank you all, and thank you each and every one of you. I appreciate it tremendously. But you've heard me say this a million times. I ask, what does it mean to be an American? What does it fundamentally mean to be an American? And it's interesting because I have people who are doctors, people who got law degrees, people who have started their own businesses and have been incredibly successful. And the one thing I always get back is, oh, it's about freedom. It's about freedom. And if you've listened to the show, you've heard me say, guess what? Here's some bad news. Serial killers have freedom. Pedophiles have freedom. Terrorists have freedom. It isn't just about being free. There's something else that's missing. And as I did this search, I kept coming back to Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And he said something that was really great. There's a lot of great stuff in that book. But one thing that I thought just took away was the idea of the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast. And what he said was missing for America was a statue of responsibility on the West Coast. Well, if there is a responsibility factor, what's that responsibility? What does it mean? And honestly, I searched for a long time trying to figure out what that meant for me. What does it mean to be an American? What is the responsibilities of an American? And then, believe it or not, I've said the preamble 100 times as we the people. But it wasn't until I stopped and said, I, a citizen of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty for myself and my posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America, that I started to understand what was really on my plate if I was an American. Think about that. Establishing justice on a personal, everyday basis, right? Jefferson said, it's eternal vigilance. You may be feeling a little bit of intensity off me. But I think maybe we've lost sight of that a little bit, don't you? Ensure justice. Promote the general welfare. Provide for the common defense. How many people are willing to step up, not only for the defense of Texas, but America itself? On a day-to-day basis, how are we teaching this to our children? How are we passing this down to our posterity? That opened up a whole can of worms for me, and I just started to challenge myself, and I figured, what do I got to do to get the word out? What do I have to do to be a participant, not a spectator? See, I was a spectator for a long time. And I do talks all the time. I work with NBA teams, NFL teams. I work with the best that you could find out there. And I always talk about moving from spectator to participant. See, the spectator gets to sit in the stands and judges the thing and gets to, that guy's a jerk. Oh, if they only would have played that play, everything would have been great. The participant's on the field. The participant's the one that gets bloody and bruised. But the participant is the one that experienced victory. Not the spectator. You think you do as a spectator. You don't. You don't wear the ring. Okay? Nobody's picking you up on your shoulders if you're a spectator. So the question is, when we talk about the Constitution today, and it is going to be a conversation, what does it mean to move from spectator to participant? What does it mean? What does the Constitution actually mean? What is it there for? And why aren't we talking about it every single day? Why aren't we holding our political leaders accountable to this document? And if you think about it, and I'm going to go into this, and I have two great guys who are going to break this down for me, all right? I got Dr. Ronald Trowbridge. Doctor, could you stand up for a second for me? All right? And I got Professor Gerald Treese. Could you stand up for me as well? Now, they have spent a lot of time working with the Constitution. Okay? They know a lot about the Constitution. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this, and we're going to open up this conversation. And I want it to be a conversation. And if you have questions, we want to set this thing up. I've got a list of questions that I'm going to ask, but I want to get to you as quickly as I can, because the sooner I get to you, the sooner we start moving from spectator to participant. Does that sound good? All right? And thank you so much. Honestly, I feel so lucky. I've been able to do some really cool things in my life, but this is, I think, this could be the most important thing I do in my life. See, I'm willing to entertain the idea that I may only exist on this planet to be of service to one person who gets it and knows what to do with it. I'm okay with that idea. I've been very fortunate. I got to do the coolest jobs on the planet Earth. All right, think about it. You know, SEAL team, coolest job ever. Then I got to go into that and do future weapons, where I go around the world, I fly an incredible aircraft, I shoot big guns, and I blow stuff up, and they pay me to do that job around the world. Then I move into Deadliest War, and I get to explore the greatest warriors throughout history, their strategy, their tactics, everything that went into that. And then I just got an opportunity to do Ultimate Soldier Challenge, where I got to hang out with warriors who have just come back, who are just, if I could give them just any acknowledgement with the History Channel, that's what I think about with that show. That should be at the end of November coming out, beginning of December. And I also got to participate in America's Story of Us. If you've seen that on the History Channel, it was a big event. It was a pleasure to be a part of that. Mankind's Story of Us is coming out in the beginning of November. So I highly recommend. That's 250,000 years of human history. So we've got a lot to talk about today. I want to jump right into it. So if I could bring up first Dr. Ronald Trowbridge. He's the former Chief of Staff and Chief Justice for Chief Justice Warren Burger and Staff Director for the Bicentennial Commission on the U.S. Constitution. Dr. Ronald Trowbridge, can you come up first, please? And next, I'd like to bring up Professor Gerald Treese, Vice President and Associate Dean of South Texas College of Law. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. So I'm going to move from the podium over there, get this thing started, and we'll go from there. Sounds good? What? Sounds good? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. Don't be spectators, man. Come on. You came all this way. You might as well step it up. Are you ready? Yes. Now we're talking. Now we're talking. Hey, by the way, I just want to take a second. I'm going to do it in the front. I'm going to do it in the back. But let's give a round of applause from everybody from Lone Star College, please. Just a round of applause for them for setting this thing up and making it all happen. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
All right. Doctor, it's yours. The reason I came tonight was I was worried about Mac going soft.
It could happen. It could happen.
You know, I heard him once a couple of years ago make a comment that was slightly only right of center rather than...
Yes, you probably heard me talking about social justice or economic justice or environmental justice.
My qualification for being here tonight is that I have read the Constitution. That puts me ahead of 4 members of the Supreme Court. I want to talk about 4 things. I'll do it very quickly. I want to first of all talk about, and I'll do these very quickly, but I want to talk about separation of church and state. There is no such thing. It is not possible. You couldn't have it even if you wanted it. Why? Because you have free speech. And when you have free speech, you can't do that. Let me read to you 2 people in the Supreme Court who talked about this. Justice Potter Stewart once said, "We err in the first place if we do not recognize as a matter of history and a matter of imperatives of our free society that religion and government must necessarily interact in countless ways. You can't separate it." And Chief Justice William Rehnquist said, quote, "The wall of separation between church and state is a metaphor based upon bad history, a metaphor which has proved useless as a guide to judging. It should be frankly and explicitly abandoned." So, if you ever come across somebody who says that will violate church and state, I want you to say, promise, you do not know what the hell you're talking about. Yeah, there is no such thing. I give you examples all night, but if you can't have religious activity on public property, then when Martin Luther King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. He gave it on the Lincoln Memorial, which is government property. So he should have been approached by a guard and said, "Reverend, I'm sorry, you can't give that talk here. You've got to go across the street to some private property." The other example I want to give you, this is really fun. What about the Texas Constitution? It begins, "Humbly invoking the blessings of Almighty God, the people of the state of Texas do ordain and establish this Constitution." It's an invocation to God, which means then that the Texas Constitution is unconstitutional. Cannot have it.
All right, let's take it from here. What I want to do from this, and thank you so much. I appreciate you starting with that, Dr. Trowbridge. Now, what I'd like to do is, personally, for you, both you gentlemen have spent a lot of time studying the Constitution. It obviously means a lot to you. I guess the question, I'll start with you, Professor Treese. What does the Constitution mean to you, and why did you dedicate so much time to learning as much as you have learned about the Constitution?
Every year, I get the opportunity to talk to young law students who are incoming law school students. And one of the reasons I wanted to be here tonight, even though I think all 5 million of the people that the senator was talking about were in front of me tonight as I drove from downtown. I think the Constitution, and for that matter our history, is a lost art. I think the Princeton studies for the last 2 decades have shown that college-bound students in the United States of America know about civics and history and government far less than they do the other subjects. And we could discuss why that's true. I have my beliefs that we've lost so many of those really dedicated teachers that existed in the junior high school and high school level. I graduated from a high school in West Texas, Odessa Permian High School, back in the mid-60s. And all of our teachers were so devoted and so great. And because of that, a love of history and the Constitution, we were taught that the Constitution was not just a good idea, it was something that all laws had to bow to. And certain truths came from that Constitution. And one of those truths I'm afraid we're losing, and this is why I have journeyed out here tonight. I want you to understand that you parents and grandparents are going to have to fill a terrible void that's been left in the education system. I don't think the kids understand any of the principles of law that are in their Constitution. I do a show on Channel 11 every Saturday morning. And because of that, on September 11th, I came to the station that morning to talk about the legal analysis on the drowning that occurred with this woman who had drowned her 5 children. And of course, that morning, everything went totally crazy. And we sat there all day long and answered questions. And we were actually waiting for someone to figure out where the president was. It was a crazy time. But I was the oldest guy on the set. We had these young reporters and young anchors, and they all looked at me, and I began to realize, sort of like you were saying, I began to realize they were asking me, "Professor Treese, are we going to be okay?" Of course, we're always okay. You know, our system is set up to be okay. We've been attacked so many different times in so many ways, we're okay. But why would we think we're okay? Why would young people think they're okay? They don't know the history of this country. They don't know how many times under this constitutional system we've had a crisis. I'm not talking about a political crisis. Everybody says there's a political crisis. I'm talking about the very survival of the nation for the first 100 years and how we continue to come back and how our military has been the sort of the armor that keeps the promise of the Constitution intact. And so I came out here today not to tell you anything you don't already know, but to convince you that there's such a void in the knowledge that exists between people that had the benefit of a very good education and foundation in history, in government, and I think it's more civics than anything. The young people, and we're talking about young people who are bound off for college, and the studies that are now showing, we have made up that gap in math and science. We're doing pretty good there. But some reason, and maybe it's because of standardized tests that aren't very challenging in the area of civics and government. But I'll tell you, it's my life's calling. Every year I get to teach students about the Constitution, and I get to tell them the great stories of people, and they so often, they don't know the stories. They know the Founding Fathers, but they don't know the heroes like Thomas Paine, and those people whose very words could keep people warm at Valley Forge. I don't know how great that is, and how people could stand up against the thing called tyranny and write a document. And of course there was 11 years between the Declaration of Independence and the actual charter and the actual Constitution. And as I tell students, we always debate what the most important part of that the Constitution is, and everybody has something to say. But the thing that I've continued to go back to is this little provision in Article 5 of the Constitution, the thing that allows the people at any time they want to change this document. And I want y'all to realize how revolutionary the document is. It's so revolutionary that for the first time, people are standing up and saying, we're not going to be bound by kings and by aristocrats. We're not going to be bound by people based on blood who have inherited property. We're going to be a system of laws, and we're going to govern ourselves. And I remember King George making that great comment that he does not think the colonies are ready for self-government. If anyone is, it's not the colonies. And the giants that grew up out of this time of the it's almost as the good professor was saying, when you look at the religious nature of the people who wrote these documents, they weren't kind of religious. You know, people like John Adams and Madison, they would be what you would call evangelical. They were so religious. And I want people to understand that this document only exists if we continue to talk about it and teach it. It's almost incumbent upon you, when you talk to your children and grandchildren, what is it? You just talk to them about it. Don't be mad at them. It's certainly not their fault that they don't know these basic truths, that the people run this government. We don't have kings, we never will. The only founding father that wanted kings was Alexander Hamilton.
Wasn't a big fan of.
Yes, yes. Well, one last comment, and I really am sincere about this. I go around speaking, and as the question was, you know, how did I get interested in the Constitution? I think as a citizen, we're the envy of everybody. How can we do this? How can we do this without kings to count on? And the answer has always been, because we the people really are you people. It's us. Does it get corrupted? Of course it does. But the system is set up for you to correct it. You know, this is the marvelous thing. And one last comment. My personal hero, Thomas Paine, did you realize he disappears during the government side of our history? You don't see him becoming Secretary of Treasury. You know what happened to Thomas Paine? Thomas Paine really believed, he hated this notion of despotism. He hated this idea of governments taking away inalienable natural rights. He is next found in prison in Paris. He's over there starting to ignite the French Revolution. And one of my very favorite bits of history is the letters that were done by the two people closest to the French government, Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. And the letters are long and well written, as these two men would write, but it really boils down to, this is just what Tom does. You know, he is a spark plug. He's out there saying there's basic human rights that do not depend upon law. They come from a higher source, and that governments repress rights. And so I just think it's always fun to have a discussion about these things, because hopefully a little piece will chip off, and you can talk to the people you love, your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, and find out where they stand. And don't be afraid to educate them. Don't be afraid to talk to them. Don't be afraid to get them a videotape or a book, because it's a powerful story. The story of the Founding Fathers is one of the most powerful stories that's ever written. People like McCullough and others who have written so beautifully about them, and it's all true. How could these people have pulled this off against the most powerful military, the most powerful and respected civic government, the British? And that's because it must be right. And so that's why I'm here.
Yes, excellent. I think it's great. I want to give Dr. Trowbridge, I want to give you an opportunity to tell us why this document means so much to you. And then what I want to do is kind of talk about the architecture of the document and what that looks like and why that's set up.
I'll do it by means of a thing that happened to me. When I worked for Chief Justice Warren Burger, I had to entertain all sorts of people from abroad and whatever. And once upon a time, I had to talk with 3 members of the Japanese diet. I don't know why it's called a diet. I don't know that they eat stuff, but it's called, that's their Congress. It's a diet. I'll never forget this. You know, you have to be nice. And I was really nice. And then this fellow from Japan held this book up like this, and he shook it. And he said, thin, inefficient. I said, whoa, time out. I wasn't very diplomatic then. And I said, this book represents governmental powers. I'm glad it's small. I said, would you rather have a document of rules and laws the size of the New York City telephone directory? Or would you rather have restricted, enumerated powers? This document is short because it represents the powers by enumeration that the government has. And so it gives you, as Mack said, the liberty, but what Mack wants with that always is responsibility or order. So it has to be ordered liberty. But that's what this book is. It's the liberty with the order of the enumerated powers in it. So I end where I began. It's a small document because it limits the powers of government and therefore gives you more freedom, but gives you an ordered freedom. There, I've told you more than I know.
Well, this is the thing. When you start to look at the Constitution and you look at the Founding Fathers as they were putting this document together, you know, it's easy to go, well, that was a long time ago. It's 1770-something and 1780-something. I mean, really, honestly, what do these guys know compared to what we have today? You know, we've got the internet, we've got, you know, whatever going on in the world, blah, 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 blah. And it's easy to go, well, you know, it was a different time back then. It's a new time this time. But it's important, I think, also to remember they were going against the most powerful centralized government on the planet, right? Mm-hmm. Against the most powerful military might the world had ever seen. So they were very familiar with these issues. The printing press had just started up, so they had to deal with media. They had to deal with books. They had to deal with stuff from the Parliament coming back to them. They had to deal with a lot of the same issues we are dealing with now. Plus, there was huge divisions between what people wanted to see happen with the government. You had the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, right? So they were sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Really? Think about it. Okay, so the fact of the matter is, it may seem like it was so different, it was so long ago, but the issues that matter to them are the same issues that should matter to us. And they are not. This is the thing, I think, with regards to the Founding Fathers. You can hear, sorry, I hit on this guy all the time because I'm not a big fan. I think the guy is, you know, I didn't want to get into it, but there's one guy out there, Bill Maher, who kind of always is bashing the Founding Fathers in any way he can, shape, or form. But there's no way that man could he couldn't hang with them for a second in a truly intellectual conversation, get rid of the word intellectual, a truly intelligent conversation. Matter of fact, there are many of the Founding Fathers that could have had that conversation with him in 7 different languages or 4 different languages. When you start to look at the Founding Fathers, I think they were extraordinary. What I want to ask you two gentlemen is, what is, for you, we'll start with you, Professor Trees, what did the Founding Fathers mean to you? When you look back at them and you hear somebody talk about, well, you know, it's yesterday's news, they didn't really have to deal with the kind of stuff that we deal with now. They did this or they did that. How bright were these men to you when you look back and you read all of this stuff? Even the letters between Madison and his wife, I mean, when you start to look, it's incredible.
It really is, and I'm not aware of modern day criticism that exists of the Founding Fathers that is scholarly or academic. It's sort of people marvel at it. And the revelation that each one of these individuals, I read a very good article about how this Judeo-Christian basis of our government came about, and how these people, and I really mean this, it's not anecdotal, it's true, about Madison and Adams. Now, Jefferson may well have been a politically religious person, and he admitted that several times. But he admired people like Madison, who believed very firmly. He was the closest thing I've seen, Madison was, to an evangelical among the Founding Fathers. But these people to criticize them is really to criticize oneself if they do it, because it's a lack of knowledge. The ability to conceive and write. And you also don't really grasp, modern day folks like us cannot grasp the incredible risk that was taken by these people. They're the ones that signed the Declaration of Independence. Alistair Cooke, who is a famous British writer and one of my very favorite authors, he always talked about us, almost like we were the rebellious teenage child of England, and that we loved England and England loved us, and that sooner or later it would all be okay. And he was questioning, how can this thing work? He said 1/3 of the Americans during the time of the Founding Fathers were fiercely in support of revolution. 1/3 were fiercely in support of the king, and 1/3 didn't care one way or the other. And I thought, that's sort of like America today. You have certain people for things, certain people against things, but most people just sit around and how do you galvanize these people? How do you get people to declare war on a nation that is so powerful that it would be, I can't even think of a sports analogy that comes close to, it's like somebody's freshman team beating the top professional team around. And then the study goes further with these men, because not only were they giants intellectually, there was a faith in them, not just a religious faith. I don't think we realized what happened at Valley Forge. And I don't think we realized how often the British beat us, like almost every time. I took some of my law students one time to Boston.
For 7 years straight, basically.
Yeah, well,
every engagement. It was.
You even go to Bunker Hill, and some of my students made the comment, "Oh, was this a great American victory?" Well, not really. Not really. We lost a lot of people there, but the British lost some people. And every one of the battles you go to, victory, it seemed like the only ones that we won, the big one was the last one. You know, we won the one that counted, I guess. But what was then the victory? The victory was we never gave up. How do you get men like George Washington? How do you even talk about them? Who was such a great man, not only in faith, because he was a man of faith, but also in dedication, a man who refused to be a king. Think about that. The only person the Founding Fathers, the only one they all liked was George Washington. And the reason is because he didn't want the job, you know? And he's the one that said, I'll take it mainly to keep this experiment, as Franklin called it, this experiment together for a while, but I don't want this job. We fought against having a permanent king
He refused a third term.
That's right.
They asked him to do a third term. He refused and said, I'm not doing it.
And even those people who were, and I think...
And they were still pushing it.
But the Founding Fathers were also very political people. They had their weaknesses. Of course they did. But they kept their eye on this incredible concept of revolution and the great cost that was paid in revolution. So it's sort of like asking, you know, a religious person about his faith. I could go on a long time on this because I think, first of all, I haven't watched the Bill Maher show, but if in fact I did, and he's taking shots at that, I think a lot of people do things on television for entertainment value. It's certainly not, there's no academic, East Coast or West Coast, who has done an expose, except perhaps on some of the moral failings of Jefferson. You know, some of the things that he did, and the keeping of slaves, which is still, Jefferson kept warning that like an alarm at night, a bell ringing at night, this slavery issue is going to come back.
Patrick Henry said the same thing.
And it did. It had to be resolved. And if there was a weakness in the Founding Fathers, I think the weakness had to do with the issue of slavery, because they reached compromises. And they knew at the time it was wrong. These great men wanted this country to exist. And so the compromises that were made, and I think so many of these great men regretted it later.
The British also wanted inroads into America as it was going through that process too, and they could do that through the southern states. So part of having the Union come together, the whole America come together, was making sure that the southern states came on board so that you could actually have the completed United States.
I believe that's right.
And that's, if you do at least the reading and the research I've done, that was a big factor. And that we'll go into a little bit more of that as we move through this. Dr. Trowbridge, for you, the Founding Fathers and what that means to you, and kind of what they were going through with regards to this process.
Well,
I think it's important too, by the way, to talk about the Founding Fathers in this context.
With a story. I remember one day in Washington, I was sitting in my office with Berger. He came down to my office every day and sat there, and he brought a clipping. And it was a clipping of a speech that Thurgood Marshall, who was then on the court, made in Hawaii, I remember. And Marshall said, and I can quote it, he said he didn't find the framers particularly wise people. So I turned to Berger and I said, Chief, that's what we called him, Chief. I've named my dog after Berger, although I call my dog Justice. I said, Chief, that may have been the dumbest comment ever made in the history of the Supreme Court, for a man on the Supreme Court to say that the framers were not particularly wise. Let me make one other point. As a professor, I've gone to slightly over 4,000 faculty meetings, and so far we have never accomplished anything. Go to a faculty meeting, they last 2 hours and nothing ever gets accomplished. And then think of 55 people in 3 months designing a whole government. I mean, that is absolutely incredible. And Benjamin Disraeli said that the Constitution is the most remarkable political document ever struck by the hand of man. So these people were geniuses. Now, as both of these guys have said, they had a problem with slavery. And that's why Thurgood Marshall made his comment that they didn't deal with slavery. But at the time, had they put slavery in there, the South would not have gone along and there would have been no Constitution. But, and I'm finished now, they added an amendment process so that later down the road that problem could be taken care of. So you can say anything you want about the framers, but if you say something nasty, I'm going to punch you out.
Now, there seems to be two schools of thought with regards to the Constitution. One of these schools, it to me just seems a little loosey-goosey when you talk about it. The Constitution as a living document. Now, it's one thing to have the amendment process and a way of structuring the Constitution so that you get You control how you adjust the Constitution. It's another thing with this idea called the living document. When you look at this, Professor Treese, what does that mean to you when you start to look at this? The amendment process is something that you can control, and if you need to, because of certain things come along, you can make those adjustments. And I think one of the reasons about the amendment process was slavery itself was one of the things that they wanted to make sure they cleaned that up. They were going to come back and deal with that. But now there's there seems to be this school of thought that the document is really a living document. It's just, it's not meant to be the founding document. It's just a living document. What do you think of that?
Well, there's some scholarship that says the Constitution's outdated, and some scholarship, I'm talking about in articles that are published and books that are published, that lead to the conclusion we need regional governments. That is, the United States needs to be split into 4, 5, or 6 different, but very much like the Articles of Confederation did. That is, that it's more regional, and we have very few interest in Texas the same way as people in New York City or San Francisco. I mean, and that sort of makes sense. But the genius behind this document, and people just gloss this over. I want you to think of this. We already had government in the colonies. Each state had their own government. The big battle at the Constitutional Convention had nothing to do with individual rights. Had little, if anything, very little mention about individual rights. It had to do with a government, if we're going to create it, because the Articles were such an abject failure. We had no weak president because we had no president during the Articles of Confederation. But that's okay because we didn't have much of a Congress either. And the courts were very, very weak because there was no federal power. So the Constitution, think about this, folks. Here's the existing body of state laws from which a lot of the documents, the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they really took a lot of language from like the Virginia Constitution and other state constitutions dealing with individual liberties. But the thing that made this Constitution so strange was that nobody trusted the federal government. Nobody, be it the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists, everybody wanted to limit the federal government's power. And so the first 3 articles of the Constitution, the ones that create the Congress, the President, and the judiciary, view those as limitations, not granting of power. It's limited power because the states have the power already. Sovereignty's in the states. The states and the people, say the 10th Amendment, gave the power to the federal government to do a limited, enumerated type of thing. And if you look at a constitutional law casebook from the 1920s, there's very few individual rights issues because they were all states' individual rights issues. Depending on what state you're in, that was the function of your speech rights and so forth. But what was the importance of this? The importance of this is the federal model worked pretty good. We didn't have all the federal agencies that are like every bit of the alphabet you can put together, from OSHA to EEOC, all these different agencies. They came about because of, this is the most unique president I think in our history, because he rates in the top 5 best presidents, depending on your philosophy, and the 5 worst presidents. It was FDR. You know, depending on your philosophy, you really, really can put your finger on FDR. What did he do? What he did is, through an economic crisis and the war, he expanded not just the role of the court, but the role of the federal government. And the thing that this professor has seen, I've never worked for Supreme Court justices. I've certainly argued in front of enough of them. Not with a great amount of success, by the way. It seems like, you know, whatever issues that we're talking about, sometimes I think that my role was to educate somebody because we weren't going to win the religion cases and so many others that we were involved in. But my point was that always with the federal government, as I tell my students, when the federal government acts, not the states, the federal government acts, you've got to get your ballpoint pen and show something in the Constitution that gives the federal government, I don't care what the federal agency is, the right to act. State governments already have that power. And yet you sit back and you think of where we are today. It's almost inverted. You just presume the federal government can do anything they want to. They can cite the Supremacy Clause in Article 6 for the best of them. But that, you know, what I'm saying is the stand that you have to take, I think, to be consistent with the concept of separation of powers is not just with the three branches, but it's also with this other line between the state governments and the federal government. Where the federal government acts and takes power, it takes it away from the states if the federal government wants to. That's the present state of constitutional law. And that's where the stand has to be. And the stand can occur with you. The stand can occur with the cases. And it doesn't matter if you lose a lot of these cases. The fact of the matter is the cases have to be argued, and they have to be presented, and they have to be taught. Because the fact of the matter is Texas and so many other states can really handle so much of the business the federal government's doing now. The federal government got in the business of doing things because we got a court at a time during the New Deal that basically let the administration do anything it wanted to. Was that because of an emergency? You bet it was. It was a depression, and it was a gut-wrenching depression. But those powers, those agencies never stop working. And as we're sitting here tonight on their fax machines and their computers, they're enacting rules and regulations called administrative rules that bind all of us. So that's a short answer to your question.
There you go. No, I think it's great. One thing is I want to do, Dr. Trowbridge, could you talk a little bit about 1913? This is going to be my last question, then I'm going to come to you, and we'll start answering some questions for you. Is that okay? Sound all right? Yeah, everybody's in there still? Are you sure? All right, I don't know, man. All right, what impact did 1913 Congress have on the Constitution? You got the federal income tax, you got popular vote for senators, the creation of the Federal Reserves. I bring this up because that was 100 years ago. I mean, when you think about it being 2013 coming up on here, that in 1 year, those three things happen, and look at the impact that's had over the last 100 years.
You've already answered the question. Andy, you've already answered the question. It's all.
What was the intent behind doing that? Why did that actually unfold that way? Why was that pushed that way? What was the need for all of a sudden making senators popular vote? Why did we have to have the Federal Reserve come in at that point? What was it about that year that all of a sudden, I think, when you look at it, is it just me, or did things shift right after that?
I don't know. I wasn't yet born, but almost. But I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
And I'm not certain. I
don't know.
But during that time in American history, you had the progressive movement that was happening. And the progressive movement turned to the popular election of senators in certain northern states, to where the progressive movement had far more effect on state constitutions than on the federal constitution. But through the progressive movement, although my friend Dan Patrick and I, when I told him one day that I admired my academic colleague Woodrow Wilson, who was president of Princeton and a great writer of things like congressional government, he goes, blah, he was a progressive. Just because a person has progressive ideas doesn't mean that they're the Antichrist, And I mentioned that women's rights and the right of women to vote came out of the progressive movement during this same time frame. I always look at that time frame because you sort of wonder what was going on in America. And you know what I tell my students about that time period? That you can make a difference, because those people made a difference. Maybe you don't agree with everything the progressives did, but that movement was totally based by the people. It didn't come from the government. They were trying to put limits on government. They were trying to do term limits, and they were trying to do these things like recall of governors and recall of members of Congress, something that's not in our Texas law. But the progressives sort of had a neat time with that. And as I tell my students, the great lesson from the progressive is you don't have to endorse everything they did, but look what they did. Look how they did it. They got a bunch of people together that had absolutely no support. Well, I don't know, Robert La Follette was probably a pretty good supporter, but you had a few people in positions of power, but most of these people are us. They just got together and they wanted to be heard, and they kept screaming until the law changed statewide, and then to the constitutional amendment process. The 19th Amendment came about, which is and that's another thing you might be surprised about, that African Americans received the right to vote and received an end to slavery before women under the 19th Amendment. And so if you were a black woman, back in 1900, you didn't get to vote yet, and not because of your race, but because of your gender. And I'm a big fan of the people doing these changes and how hard it is to do. But you just think about the resolve of the people that fought this thing. They were not weak-kneed on this. They would not take losses. Yeah, that's the big lesson. In fact, they got, embarrassed or, oh gosh, we're running out of money, we're running out of everything. It didn't affect them. That's a great lesson. The progressives, you can learn something from them, I think. But that's my take on that period of time. I can't hear anything.
There we go. All right, what I'd like to do right now is move this into a Q&A, and if you want to ask questions about the Commerce Clause, anything about what the Supreme Court's going to look at, anything that you see as far as the structure, if you want to ask about the Bill of Rights, whatever you want to ask about with regards to amendments, please do that now. Anybody having questions at all for these two gentlemen about the Constitution, the structure of the Constitution at all? Anyone? Don't move from spectator to participant. Yes, sir. Please. Pretty please with sugar on it.
If we have a federal government of enumerated powers and they're forbidden to operate outside of that box, and we do have an amendment process, how can they make a so-called treaty that is repugnant to the Constitution to supposedly amend the Constitution? And should we accept that? What should we do? Tell me, please.
I don't know. You take it.
Well, like I say, there's a reason we have so few amendments, because it's so hard. When the Supreme Court decides something, like on school prayer, on the abortion issue, and everybody says, well, the answer is to amend the Constitution. I think that's fine. But the success ratio, you've got to be bloody, bold, and resolute if you want to amend that Constitution. You've got to be able to be an organizer and a person that can connect. Fortunately, with the internet, that's far easier now than it was in earlier days. And so I want to answer the question a little bit different way, because while I'm a fan of the amendment process, and as I told you under Article 5, it's the retention that people have over the document, I'm also just a big fan of challenging, as you said in the first sentence of your question. Are we really accepting that this federal government is limited and enumerated when the Supreme Court continues to give them a free pass on almost all legislation and administrative rules? And see, this professor has long believed that the court decision starting in 1937, during the New Deal, going between 37 and 43, the ones that gave basically a free pass to Congress to define what commerce means. Actually, Justice Roberts limited what commerce meant in the case involving Obamacare. But he said that the taxing power was the way to uphold the federal health care reform law. So I'm hoping I'm answering your question, because I think it's important. But at the same time, I don't want people to leave the discussion on constitutional law thinking that when you take the Bill of Rights out of the 27 amendments, you've had so few successful efforts, and yet the history is full of attempts to amend the Constitution. The Equal Rights Amendment in my lifetime failed, and that was because of gender equality, and they couldn't figure out how to determine if a state changed its mind if it counted or not. That's an interesting story, by the way. I hope that answers your question.
You got a question over here? There you go. Go ahead, please, sir.
If the amendment process is so difficult to accomplish change, can you retry issues before the Supreme Court and try to enforce the constitutional positions and premises and principles in the subsequent ruling, or once an issue's been decided, do we just have to deal with it?
Well, there have been some instances, for example, with prohibition, where things later on were changed. In the Dred Scott case, the Constitution itself, or rather the interpretation of it, was changed by the courts. So that's doable. The problem is the courts tend to work by what's called stare decisis, let the decision stand, and precedent turns out to be very important. I will make another point here, and I'm intending here to offend as many people as I can. My wife died of cancer, and near the end of her life, she was given an investigational drug. And it kept her alive for another 6 months, and it got rid of all of her pain. So I became very active in trying to get drugs, investigational drugs for people with terminal cancer. And a group that I belong to, we actually sued the FDA, arguing that if someone is dying, you ought to be able to get access to that drug. And we took it to court. We took it to the appellate court in Washington, D.C. And we argued, and I helped write part of this brief, but we argued that if you have a right to defend yourself against an attacker, why can't you have the constitutional right to defend yourself if that attacker is cancer? And that argument seemed entirely reasonable. But let me tell you what happened, and this is a tremendous irony. I went to hear the case, and I heard the judges asking the questions. And I turned to our attorney and I said, "Oh, we're going to get that guy. We're going to get that guy." And the attorney on our side had clerked for Scalia. "We're going to get that guy. We're going to get that guy, aren't we?" He said, "No." I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Because he cannot support this drug thing. He can't do it." I said, "Why can't he support it?" And I want you to look at the logic here because it's very peculiar. We were asking two things: that if you're dying, you should have a chance to get a drug to save your life. And the decision should be between you and your doctor. And my friend told me conservatives will never support this drug thing. Why? Because it will endorse the two premises of Roe v. Wade. In Roe v. Wade, you argue I need it for my health, and you argue that the decision ought to be between the doctor and the woman. So if the court supported our position on allowing you to have a drug for your health and a decision between you and your doctor, then they were solidifying the premises of Roe v. Wade. So in that case, we got the libertarians to vote for us, we got the liberals to vote for us, but we lost all of the conservative votes. It's an irony. And I stood there watching this, and they cheered when they won. And I wanted to say, are you really happy that you have just killed several 100,000 people? They were happy about winning, but they killed an awful lot of people. It's an irony.
Is the mic on? All right, thank you. I teach constitutional law at U of H here on campus part-time. It's kind of ironic, we're here at Lone Star College where I was fired for sending out a satirical email criticizing the president, and we're talking about the First Amendment at perhaps one of the most inappropriate places to do so. That the first thing this chancellor did when he came in is he blocked any access to any website that was critical of him from any of his previous jobs, and only under a lawsuit did they open that up. I later successfully sued the college for denying me a due process. Sorry about the $180,000 in legal fees that cost. I do have a question about the Constitution. I think you could make a pretty good case that the Constitution had failed and that it was Marbury versus Madison which has actually preserved the Constitution. That without judicial review, the amendment process is so difficult, we probably would have had to have gone to a constitutional convention or two to update the Constitution. That is one thing that's engraved on the walls of the Jefferson Memorial, that as society changes, so should its laws and institutions, for if they do not, it's like asking a man to wear the same coat he wore as a boy. What about the role of judicial review? Did judicial review save democracy, or should it have gone the other way? Should we have just gone down with the ship the way it was written?
Up until the time of John Marshall, there was no judicial review. And John Marshall decided he was going to hijack the whole process. And he said, we are going to determine what the Constitution is, and we're going to determine what the law is. And up to that point, you did not have that situation. So in Madison versus Marbury, the Supreme Court, for the first time ever, overturned a law of Congress. But then it became almost a kind of imperial court. There are checks and balances on everything except the Supreme Court. And it is a kind of imperial court. And following John Marshall's tradition, the court can do pretty much what it wants to do, as you saw in the individual mandate. Let me say something else to you. Your comment about having difficulty with free speech. It's unbelievable to me how many institutions would restrict your speech. It happens all the time. Texas Tech University in 2004, you may remember, said that if you want to speak critically, you must do it in a free speech zone. And it was a 20-foot by 40-foot gazebo. And you had to go get in that gazebo. And boy, do I give the Texas Tech people an awful lot of flack. Your president wants free speech in a gazebo. Well, the kid sued and went to the federal judge, and it took the judge about 4 seconds to say that's unconstitutional. But institutions, even public institutions, will do their damnedest to take away your free speech, as you found out.
Speaking of free speech, I was talking about this a little bit as well. I just want to throw this in here. UN Resolution 1618, talking about the blasphemy law that's going down, that the President and the Secretary of State is talking about supporting against the potential, if you criticize Islam or you criticize a Muslim faith, and it could lead to potential violence, that you could be criminally held accountable for that. Is there a possibility that treaties could supersede the Constitution?
Well, in this, go ahead.
I'm interested in both your takes. So I'm sorry I jumped in there, but that's been something I wanted to ask.
I'll be glad to answer that, because that's a common mistake. Is in the hierarchy of law, if this was a football rating system, in first place, always in first place, is the Constitution and the amendments. In second place is a tie. Federal statutes equal treaties. The Supreme Court, in a case called Whitney against Robertson, said if there's a conflict between a treaty and between domestic law, be it statutory law or administrative law, then whatever comes last in time controls. But that you're always subservient to the Constitution. Well, Dean Treese, that can't be true, because we might be in violation of international law. We're often in violation of international law. The state of Texas was in violation of international law in Medellin versus Texas. The case where the Supreme Court said you cannot execute this man who's a Mexican national because he wasn't given his consular rights. And Texas said, we're going to do it anyway. And the difference in that case was the treaty that was done with nations, both the Geneva and Vienna Convention treaties, the provision in with consular rights required Congress to pass some laws. A lot of treaties require Congress to pass laws to support them. Some treaties don't. But regardless, treaties don't ever get into first place. You can't ever have a treaty that abrogates part of the Constitution. Unless, of course, as some cynics say, if we lose a war and then we're going to lose the Constitution anyway, the new people that win can write whatever they want. But as long as we have this government and we have this Constitution, then treaties will always be tied with statutes and regulations. Does that answer your question?
Anybody else? Questions, please. Yes.
As we know, the Emancipation Proclamation did nothing. But in order to stop slavery, they had to they had to add like the 13th Amendment. But with the 18th Amendment, it was the opposite. The 18th Amendment didn't really do anything without the Volstead Act. Why is that?
Are you on top of that?
No.
Well,
I have this
I was
flaw,
with you for a second,
and that is
yeah.
when I don't know the answer to something.
I apologize.
I'll let you know right away.
Well, let me ask the questioner a question, because I'm always trying to recruit people to go to law school. This is a young man that needs to go to law school someday. But the 13th Amendment, you're exactly right. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was made lawful by the 13th Amendment. Everybody agree on that? The president probably didn't have the power domestically to do this, but okay, we give him a break. It was a war, and now we have the 13th Amendment. But now, that's a separate premise from the Volstead Act and from Prohibition, but the difference between the 21st Amendment that repealed Prohibition. Am I missing the question here? And if so, I'm sorry, could you restate it?
Well, you got the first part right.
Good.
But
I was worried there for a moment.
what I'm asking is that since the Emancipation Proclamation did nothing, and the 13th Amendment did everything for that, why is it the opposite for the 18th Amendment?
Well, because the 21st Amendment. The 21st Amendment is the one that said we were just kidding. That we ended Prohibition with the 21st Amendment, with the language in the 21st Amendment that says that no longer will the federal government be able to regulate anything concerning the distribution of alcohol, except taxing, of course. And it's left it to the states from that day forward. And so if anything, while you're probably smart enough to see an inconsistency that I don't, I think the two are pretty consistent. Both of them had to do with constitutional amendments that resolve social issues. The difference, the 21st Amendment just overturned a previous constitutional amendment. That's kind of the way I think it's supposed to work, rather than having the courts do it. I hope that helped. Another budding law student.
Also, one question. Why did they put kids in that are like higher functioning, that have Down syndrome, a little bit of autism, a little bit of Down syndrome, in those classes with low functioning kids that don't think like them, that don't act like them? And why can't it just be an in-between class, in between regular ed and special needs? Why can't you put them in there?
Well, what you need to do is ask the president. The Lone Tree's right out there. I'm just a constitutional law
Can you
professor.
ask the president this?
I'm sorry?
Can you ask the president this? Why can't kids be let's in between regular ed and special needs, besides just having a little bit of Down syndrome and autism? Doesn't mean they're retarded and stupid.
I'm
They're
agreeing
really
with
smart.
you. I'm agreeing with you, but what is this panel? How can we help you?
They could eat independently of normal people and try to learn how to be normal.
Well, there you
and
go.
Try to learn how to make normal choices.
But the way to change anything you disagree with in the political system is organized. You get enough people complaining and protesting, and you get change.
There should be an in-between class, and that should be changed.
Okay,
sir.
I agree with you. I don't know what I'm talking about on that, but I agree with you.
Thank you.
Mainly because you have zeal behind that.
But you know what? I think, Professor Treese, you're right, though. Listen, I think it's great. It's about getting out there. You can get the other kids in your class. You can actually go right to the person who's running, the president of the school. You can bring them there, and maybe you can work that out with them.
And don't accept no.
By getting involved. Don't accept no.
You
go get what
just
you want.
got to be. I always tell people, I stole that motto, bloody, bold, and resolute, from probably one of your heroes, General MacArthur. He always said every morning, you have to be bloody, bold, and resolute. And I think his troops understood full well. The fact that we get hammered for a while doesn't mean we're going to lose, because we don't lose wars.
Not dead, can't quit. Come on, you guys know that. So a hand up over here. There you go, sir.
I've noticed it seems like it's been a long time since the Constitution's been amended. I wonder if there's been a loss of interest in improving the Constitution, or do people feel that it can't be improved now?
One of the things about American people is that most of them don't know a thing about the Constitution. If I walk down the street and stop 500 people, I'll say, what do you know about the Constitution? Well, I have a right to own a gun. Here, let me show you. And they'll remember separation of church and state, and they'll remember free speech, and then what? He said, no, damned if I know. They don't know. Americans don't know anything about the thing. They just don't. And I don't know what you do about that. I remember when I worked for Berger. You won't believe this. Berger wanted people to read the Constitution. So we would go to McDonald's and he'd put them on the food trays. And when you got your food, there's the Constitution. And there was Berger, and sometimes I saw him going through the trash cans because they'd throw the whole thing, you know, in the trash, and Berger would say there's a lost Constitution. So he'd reach in the trash and pull it out. But Americans don't know anything about the Constitution. I don't know what you do about it.
Well, can I also rejoin, and certainly I agree with that. And Chief Justice Berger also had another title, which I always respected. He was the chairman or head of the Bicentennial Commission, and he's the one that saw to it that all these little pocket constitutions that were made available to every university and every high school in the country, free of charge. Something I still think is there and available for educators, and I know that they always give us a big supply at the law school. But I do think you're onto something. I saw an article not long ago about the proposed constitutional amendments that are in the hopper in Washington all the time. You'd be amazed. There's a couple to impeach the president. There's a couple to impeach the attorney general. There are attempts to change the health care law, that is the amendment process. Why does it usually fail? In my lifetime, I saw the Hyde Amendment fail. Do y'all know what the Hyde Amendment was? It was an attempt. Well, there's two versions, and I'll just shorten it up, both on the abortion issue in Roe versus Wade, and then the religion issue on prayer in public schools. Could the Constitution be amended to where the Supreme Court is wrong? Of course. The Constitution cannot be unconstitutional. That is, if you have a constitutional amendment saying this, that, or the other. Let me tell you my personal fantasy. I think people are scared of starting the amendment process because in Article 5, there's a couple ways you can amend. That is through the votes of Congress, and then you go to the states, or the states could call a constitutional convention. And I have mentioned to Dan Patrick several times, he is a firm believer. Have you ever known Dan not to be a firm believer? If he's a believer, he's a firm believer. And I mentioned to him, you know, this Constitution came about. The Founding Fathers didn't intend this to happen. They started working on that little thing that we've talked about a little bit tonight, the Commerce Clause, because the states were at war with each other commercially and economically. New York would put a big tax on goods coming in from Philadelphia. The states and cities were at war commercially with each other. We didn't have a Commerce Clause. The dialogues of Madison's notes on the Constitutional Convention, it's almost like using my language, not his. One thing led to another. And they just tried to scrap the whole document and write the Constitution of the United States. And so I have a feeling this is just a law professor's take on this, and it's an instinct I have. I think everybody's a little afraid of that. Everybody's a little afraid that if we start, not the amendment process through Congress, but if the states call another constitutional convention, nobody knows what will happen if you call it for the purpose of overturning the decision dealing with federal health care reform. If you call it on the question of school prayer or Roe versus Wade, once you get people there, once the states are there, they can scrap the whole thing. Their delegations can scrap the whole thing. It would certainly make it easier for me to teach constitutional law. We can just throw the other book out, just like I guess they did in 1787, and they just scrapped the Articles of Confederation. Oh, wait a minute. They didn't have any cases. So there wasn't anything going on at that time. So this is my personal belief. I've always wondered the same thing privately. You know, because I see many movements get started. I saw a great movement that I thought was going to go far. And they're like solar flares. They come out for a while and people are energetic about them. Then I think you're right. I think people just lose interest in it. You know, it's too hard. This stuff is hard. It's not magic like on television where the first 30 minutes the problem is stated and the last 30 minutes it gets solved. You spend your lifetime not solving a lot of these problems. And it could be your children or your grandchildren that are going to have to finish the job. But the lesson has always been, we just don't give up here. We just keep going. And if the courts and the philosophy of the court's different, you just have to get a different, you know, I'm not even criticizing a president. I'm talking about the president. The president's the one that makes nominations to the federal judiciary. The amendment that I told Dan Patrick, and he was so excited about, is one that limits the role of the Supreme Court. One that actually puts the Supreme Court in a position where those justices have to answer to Congress every 10 years instead of lifetime tenure. It might have been important when it first started because the president and the Congress were the two political fighters in the ring and the court was sort of the referee. But the referee is now taking over the ring. And so there have been many, it's not just me, there are professors at the University of Virginia, at Syracuse Law School. And the great thing about the internet, although I'm not as good at it as my assistant, Ms. Devine, is, you know, that's a real thing. I read a great article I want to tell you about, and y'all can look it up. It said, if Thomas Paine were alive today, he'd be a blogger. And I got thinking about that. That may be true, because what a great way to get messages out. This is, and it's going to get more and more exciting. The idea is that you stand for something. You just hang in there long enough. It's not going to be easy. Is it going to be easy to raise money? Nope. Is it going to be difficult? Yep. Should you still do it? It's up to you. You're the only one that knows how dedicated you are to whatever the cause is. It's always been true. And I apologize for over-answering your question, but I do believe there's a fear with a lot of people that that constitutional convention called by the states could lead to scrapping this whole thing. And nobody that I know wants to scrap the whole thing. But if you get the people that hate Roe versus Wade and the people that hate Engel versus Fatale, the school prayer case, toss in a little bit of federal health care reform, you got these groups that have nothing in common. And suddenly you start trading off and who knows what we have left. The separation of powers, checks and balances just fade away. Does it matter? Maybe not. Maybe not. But you have to deal with the question, is this Constitution relevant? It is present and it is imminent. And as the professor was talking about, you know, the thing I found out about First Amendment rights, and in our country, defending First Amendment rights, which I've done in court far more times than I want to remember, you have to be ready to lose and lose big at the district court level. You usually win the further you get away from the emotional issues and the people that are all mad about things. The higher up you get to the appellate courts, they look at the pure law questions. Were you calling for something that was unlawful? Were you doing it presently? And the thing you were calling for that the government said that was unlawful, is it circular or was it imminent? It's like I tell my students, it's one thing if I say, I hate City Hall, someone needs to burn it down. That's protected. But I can't say, by the way, somebody needs to burn it down and the gasoline is in my truck and the torches are in my car and the security guard leaves at 10 o'clock. I'm giving the means to do the lawless act then. So anyway, it's a short, brief version of the First Amendment.
I have a question for you. Give me the vote, please, on Fisher, and give me the vote, please, on same-sex marriage. Give me the vote on Fisher, Supreme Court vote on Fisher, and Supreme Court vote on same-sex marriage. That's to you.
Oh, you're asking me? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What the professor's talking about.
Yeah, wait.
Well, I like your thoughts. Look, y'all didn't come up and give your time just to hear my take on the Amy Fisher case, but I think I'll give it to you anyway. That's right. But a few years ago, the Supreme Court decided twin cases that dealt with a law school and also dealt with an undergraduate school. and it dealt with the issue of racial affirmative action. And the Supreme Court justified, not in the undergraduate model. The undergraduate model, race was being used with a point system, and it struck it down. But race being used not as a determining factor, but as a factor. The Supreme Court endorsed what's called the Harvard program, and Harvard did that. Now, let's fast forward to Amy Fisher's situation. She's a young lady from this area who wanted to go to the University of Texas, undergrad school, not law school, undergrad school. She was in the top 12 or 13%, therefore she wasn't automatically admitted. Her position, which is disputed by the UT administration, is that she was denied admission because of her race, which was Caucasian, and that a minority got her seat. The University of Texas takes what they call a holistic position. Even Justice Roberts asked during the questioning, what does that mean? What are you talking about? We look at the whole person. But Roberts kept focusing, no you don't, you focus on race. You're focusing on that. The UT position is Amy Fisher would not have been admitted anyway, regardless of what UT had done. But UT had already made the arguments at the lower court that basically said the affirmative action model favoring race but not as a determining factor was the difference in her admission. They've now changed their position at UT. They said, we were just kidding, we have other reasons to exclude her too. I think though, my take on that, even though you have a recusal by Justice Kagan, and what you're facing is an 8-judge panel, this is what I do with my spare time. Instead of playing golf or tennis, I read questions that were presented by the court to the advocates. And in that case, I think the change from Justice Alito, that is Justice O'Connor, who was the crucial vote in the cases, the previous cases 8 years ago, I think Justice Alito's questions clearly indicate that affirmative action, which has been pretty much devastated and ended in every section of our society except higher education, I think it's had its day. And Justice Brennan used to ask that question back in the 70s. When will we no longer have to use reverse discrimination? When will we now not have to do that? And I think the court's going to answer the question that this is the time, and we're going to end that. And one of my students asked, well, Amy Fisher went on to LSU, and so how can this be made up? And my answer has always been, since the Phoenicians coined money, the answer is the same. They're going to pay her damages. The damages that they're going to take UT for their word, that a UT degree is so much better than an LSU degree. Not me saying it, that's UT saying it. Kind of funny, isn't it? And then on the other question, we've been working on this issue a lot across the country. There are two versions of the gay marriage problem or gay marriage issue. This professor has always believed that the 10th Amendment protects those traditional state functions that were being done by the colonies back at the time of the 10th Amendment being written. But on top of that, it's not just me saying it, the Congress said it in the Defense of Marriage Act. That was pushed through Congress by President William Jefferson Clinton. That is the Defense of Marriage Act, which says exactly what so many states say, that a marriage is that between a man and a woman. And so, is this going to be the next big civil rights issue? Is this going to be one that puts, right now the two most protected groups from states' discrimination are women and racial and ethnic groups? Are we going to add that to the list? I don't know. I think the court has not tipped its hand yet. The court in a case out of Texas, out of Houston as a matter of fact, Lawrence versus Texas, protected the rights of gay men to engage in sodomy, but it was under privacy protections under the Fourth Amendment. They didn't declare that homosexuals were a protected group. And so while I'm pretty certain what's going to happen in Amy Fisher's case, I don't have enough data yet. We've got two cases out of the court, one case out of Colorado, where Colorado gave affirmative action by statute to everybody in the state except gay people. And the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. You know, you can't divvy out protection to everybody and target one group for status. And so I just don't have enough data to make a prediction. I'm not even certain the court's going to grant review. That's pending right now, the cert process, where a case comes out of the highest court in the state or out of the federal courts, and it sits there in the clerk's office for cert application. I think for years I made a career out of getting these letters from the clerk's office, and they weren't good news. No matter how much effort we put into the cert application and the reason cert should be granted, I always thought that was personal. When it said your application for certiorari has been denied, and they put denied in big bold letters. And I was saying, well, you don't have to be that way. You know, just say we've given it a lot of thought. It was a close call, but we're not going to grant review this time. So I don't have a take on the gay marriage issue as much as I do the affirmative action issue.
Well, I just want to say, believe it or not, it is 8:40 or almost right now 8:40. We were supposed to wrap at 8:30. So what I want to do right now is just first of all, I want to give you an opportunity to thank Professor Gerald Treese and Dr. Ronald Trowbridge for being here.
This is like Christmas Eve for me. Anytime I can talk about the Constitution, my wife gets tired of hearing about it.
Is there anybody here from the Lone Star College right now? If you can put your hands up for us, please. Anybody else? Thank you. Can we give a round of hand for everybody else from Lone Star College for putting this event on? Thank you so much.
And you people need to come to law school, you students. Study hard.
I got a question because, can I just also acknowledge Mark McCoy over there? He is the general manager for KSEV. This is his brilliant idea, and he deserves credit for it. And the question that I want to ask you, because he wants to do this once a quarter, would you like to do this again and actually go into more detail and take times with each article and take time with the Bill of Rights and go through each amendment, talk about the Commerce Clause? We could spend a whole 2 hours on the Commerce Clause easy, I think. And how that's influenced just how big the government's gotten.
Well, that's true, but I think Lone Star needs to start raising money to get a helicopter. You have no idea what it's like fighting that downtown traffic. So, I'm kidding.
I live in Pearland, buddy. Come on. Come on, shake it off.
You're a Navy
shake
SEAL.
It off.
I know.
Shake it off, Professor.
He would probably
shake it off.
run the whole way.
Not dead, can't quit. I've been up since 3. Knock it off. All right? All right, I want to also, can I ask you all to stand on your feet for me for a second, please? Listen, there's a million other things you could have done tonight. You took the time because you love your country, because you understand the value of the Constitution to be here. And I want to acknowledge each and every one of you. So if you could just be kind enough to reach out, just a handshake to each person next to you, get to know each other just for a second. I want you to know how much I appreciate you taking the time, and every single one of you just getting a chance to say hello and look each other in the eye.
My wife's battling cancer right now.
It was a nightmare.
Also, can I ask you to do me one favor? Could you all give yourselves a round of applause for caring enough to be here when there's so many other places you could have been? All right? I just want to acknowledge you, tell you how much I appreciate you. I can't wait to talk to you tomorrow morning. I'll be up at 3, I promise. Okay? And thank you for you supporting KSEV. Thank you for supporting the sponsors. Thank you for supporting these two gentlemen. Thank you for being a part of the Lone Star College experience. Thank you for being here. God bless you. Much love and respect to you all. Thank you. Thank you very much.